And the second question is more maybe as a CFO, right? And this question is from Professor Mark Somolet, also a former Colgate Palmolive executive. And he says, how do you prioritize marketing investments across categories and markets?
Let me offer you two inputs that I'm going to sidestep a little bit, and then I'll come right back into the question. The first thing I would say is at times we tend to prioritize when prioritization is not needed. So the first question I'd always ask is, what's the problem we are trying to solve? Because typically if it's marketing dollars, generally prioritization is not as important. And I'll tell you why. If it's a good innovation or if it's a good plan, it needs to be able to self-fund itself, right? And that is important. If it is not good enough, then it is probably a bad idea to start with. And prioritization is not going to solve it because you're borrowing money from something that is working in order to fund this, right? Our global CFO and COO, John Moeller, has an interesting jingle. I'll try to recall and code it the right way. What he says is, if you have top line without bottom line, it's a waste of time. If you have bottom line without top line, it's a matter of time, right? So if you're trying to borrow from something that is working and investing in something that's not, it's a bad idea. Then it's not a question of prioritization. I would say be decisive and don't do that. Prioritization comes typically in technical communities and it comes to human beings because we tend to be limited in our capability and capacity. And at that point, then you prioritize based on two vectors typically, which is, do you have a winning proposition? If you do, then it's a function of how do you sequence it to make sure that you're able to address the biggest consumer needs, which have the biggest returns for the company as well. And then you go and address the other needs in a basis that offers you the ability to address it, but perhaps a year or two down the line. And that's where we do both long-term planning as well as short-term fiscal year planning. Those are the vectors that I've generally used in order to service the different priorities that are always going to compete with one another.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you, George.